There was no sound in the space between planets. There was only the steady pulse of thought, carried like a whisper through the unknown. And it was there, in that silence, that Captain Sera Valan sat, gazing upon the blue-green world, the one her people had long feared. No one could understand why anyone would choose to live there. Even now, staring down at it, the swirling clouds barely concealing the storms that raged across the surface, Sera found it difficult to grasp. Earth, this Deathworld, as it was known, was alive in ways that defied reason. It should have destroyed its inhabitants long ago. And yet, humanity not only endured, they thrived. It was the very impossibility of their survival that had drawn her here, against the warnings of her council, against the ingrained instinct of her people. Her mind drifted, and she closed her eyes, letting the weight of the moment press into her. The question gnawed at her soul: what kind of beings were these humans, who could grow stronger in the face of a planet so determined to break them? Life endured, she thought. But here? How? She had studied worlds where life was a gentle whisper, planets bathed in tempered sunlight, where peace and tranquility allowed entire species to evolve without ever facing true conflict. And yet, those species lacked the resilience that humans had. On those worlds, the smallest disruption, the faintest hint of catastrophe, led to extinction. But Earth was a storm. It was chaos. Life on this planet was not given, it was taken. The creatures here had to wrest their existence from the elements, from the very ground beneath them. The planet didn't welcome them, it challenged them. And they loved it for that. Captain Valan, a voice chimed from behind her, pulling her back from her thoughts. We've entered orbit. No significant interference from the atmosphere. Sera turned to face her second-in-command, an expressionless being named Korsh. Like all of her kind, he was pale, smooth-skinned, and devoid of the scars that came with a lifetime of struggle. Their lives were easy. Too easy. And Sera was beginning to suspect it was that very ease that had made them so weak. Understood, she replied. Prepare the shuttle. I'll be going down alone. Korsh's brow furrowed in confusion. Alone, Captain? That's unwise. The humans. They are dangerous. I know, Sera interrupted, her voice steady but far from calm. That's why I must go alone. They don't respond well to groups. And besides, this is a mission of understanding, not conquest. Korsh hesitated, but nodded, stepping back into the shadows of the ship's corridor. Sera could feel his unease, but it didn't matter. Her mind was set. She had to see the humans up close. She had to understand them, not from the reports of others, but through her own experience. To stand on their soil, to breathe their air. She descended alone. The shuttle cut through the planet's atmosphere, the turbulence rattling the hull as flames licked the edges of the vessel. Outside the window, the landscape below began to sharpen into focused dense forests, jagged mountains, rivers that wound like veins across the Earth's surface. It was raw, untamed, and beautiful in its defiance. As she neared the ground, Sera could see human settlements, massive cities built in places that seemed designed to test the limits of survival. Some perched on the edges of cliffs, others near the coast where the oceans threatened to consume them. It was as if humanity had deliberately chosen the most dangerous places to live, daring nature to strike them down. She landed on the outskirts of a sprawling metropolis. The air outside was thick and humid, carrying the scent of wet earth and something else, something alive. It was unlike anything she had ever breathed before, a reminder that Earth itself was not just a world, but a living entity. Every part of it was in flux, constantly changing, constantly growing. She stepped out of the shuttle, her boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The wind caught her, carrying with it the distant roar of a storm building on the horizon. She had read about the unpredictability of Earth's weather, but reading about it was different from feeling it. This planet was wild, and it would not be tamed. Ahead, a figure approached. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a steady gait, he was human Elias. He was one of the few humans the Council had permitted to meet with off-world diplomats. There was something unsettling in his gaze, something she couldn't quite define. His eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken stories, as if he had seen too much and survived it all. "Welcome to Earth," he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "I see you decided to come alone. Brave." Sera held his gaze, unflinching. "I came to understand," she replied, "and I believe understanding begins with vulnerability." He nodded, though his expression remained unreadable. "Understand this, then. Earth isn't kind. And we, its children, are even less so." The words settled into Sera's mind like a heavy stone, their weight inescapable. There was no bravado in his statement, just the simple truth. And yet, there was something beneath it. Not pride, but acceptance. As if he had long ago made peace with the cruelty of his world. "Then tell me," she said, her voice soft, "why stay? Why choose this life when you could have left? The galaxy is vast, and there are countless worlds far safer than this." Elias's lips twitched into the barest hint of a smile. "You misunderstand, Captain. It's not that we couldn't leave. It's that we wouldn't. To live anywhere else, it would be a betrayal of who we are." Sera frowned. "Who are you?" For a moment, Elias was silent, his gaze shifting to the distant horizon where the storm clouds were gathering. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "We are the storm." The words hung in the air between them, and Sera felt the weight of them settle into her bones. It was a truth she hadn't expected, but had perhaps always known. Humanity was not a product of their environment, they had become their environment. They had become the very force that had once sought to destroy them. She stood in silence as Elias turned and began to walk away, his figure disappearing into the shadows of the approaching storm. For the first time in her life, Sera felt small. Not because of the storm, not because of the planet itself, but because she was beginning to understand just how little she truly knew. As the wind began to rise and the first drops of rain struck her face, she realized that her mission to understand Earth was only beginning. There was no turning back now. The rain fell harder as Sera stood motionless, her eyes scanning the horizon, trying to grasp what Elias had meant. "We are the storm." The words echoed in her mind, not fully understood, but undeniably true. It was not a simple declaration. It was something deeper, something that spoke of a complexity she had only just begun to glimpse. As the storm grew around her, the temperature dropped. The wind lashed against her face, carrying the earth's moisture, and yet she remained still. Elias had vanished into the city's distant shadows, leaving her alone in this unfamiliar place. It wasn't just the environment that unsettled her. There was something in the way he had spoken, the way he carried himself, that hinted at layers of experience she couldn't yet comprehend. Her people had warned her, of course. Humanity was dangerous, unpredictable. They had survived a planet that seemed to actively resist their existence. And now, with every breath she took of this strange, untamed air, Sera felt the full weight of what that survival meant. But danger alone didn't define a species. There was something more to humans. Something she needed to understand. Sera began walking toward the heart of the city, feeling the ground beneath her shift with each step. The rain-slicked streets were quiet, almost unnaturally so, and yet she sensed the presence of life all around her. From the towering structures of metal and glass to the lush vegetation interwoven into every corner, humanity had learned to thrive not by conquering nature, but by coexisting with it, in an uneasy truce. The architecture was unlike anything she had seen before. In her world, cities were pristine, efficient, and functional to the point of sterility. But here it was different. The structures rose high into the sky, organic and technological elements intertwined seamlessly, as if they had grown from the earth itself. And yet, there was an edge to everything, a hardness that mirrored the nature of the planet itself. Even in their greatest achievements, there was a subtle violence, a reminder that nothing here was given freely. She made her way into the city, where the lights dimmed beneath the overcast sky. The streets were sparsely populated, and the few humans she passed paid her little attention. Their expressions were focused, determined, and yet distant, as if they were all silently carrying something too heavy to share. It was a different kind of coldness than she had anticipated. She had expected hostility, suspicion even, but instead, there was a quiet restraint that unnerved her more than open aggression ever could. It was in the middle of this silence that she met him, a diplomat by human standards, though to Sera, there was nothing particularly diplomatic about his presence. He stood at the end of a narrow street, tall and broad-shouldered like Elias, but with sharper eyes, more calculating. "Captain Sera Valan, I presume," he said without introduction. His voice carried a weight that immediately commanded her attention. Sera nodded, trying to match his intensity. "You know who I am?" The man smiled faintly. "I do. My name is Adrian Pierce. I've been tasked with ensuring your understanding of Earth remains accurate." There was a certain ambiguity in his words, but Sera held back her questions. "And what exactly does that entail?" "Walking with us," he said simply. "Seeing what we've built and what we've endured. We're not the monsters your kind imagines, but we are not saints either." Sera glanced around, taking in the stillness of the city around them. "So, you're here to show me the truth?" "Something like that," Adrian replied, turning and gesturing for her to follow. "Come, there's much for you to see." As they walked through the city, Sera's unease only grew. It wasn't the buildings or the people. It was something deeper, something in the air, in the way the humans moved and spoke. There was an underlying tension here, a silence that spoke volumes. She could feel the weight of their history pressing in on her. Every structure, every street, seemed to tell a story of survival, of struggle. But it was a story told quietly, without fanfare, without explanation. Humans didn't boast of their achievements, but they didn't hide their scars either. Adrian led her toward the center of the city, where the tallest building stood. It wasn't a government building, as she had expected, nor was it a monument. It was a marketplace, bustling with activity despite the rain. People moved quickly, exchanging goods, speaking in short bursts of conversation. There was a fluidity to their interactions, a practiced efficiency that spoke of a people who knew how to adapt. "You see them as dangerous," Adrian said, his voice cutting through the noise. "And you're not wrong. But that danger is not what you think. It's not violence for the sake of violence. It's something else. Something we've learned through centuries of struggle." Sera remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "We've had to fight for everything," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Our land, our resources, our very right to exist. This planet. It doesn't care about us. It doesn't nurture us. It's indifferent. And in that indifference, we've found our strength." Sera frowned. "You've found strength in suffering." "Not in suffering," Adrian corrected. "In survival, we've learned to endure, to adapt, to evolve. Other species, they thrive because their environments allow it. But we thrive in spite of ours." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You think of us as primitive, as volatile, and maybe we are. But we are also resilient, more than you could ever understand." Sera met his gaze, searching for some hint of emotion, some flicker of vulnerability. But there was none. He was as unreadable as the city around them, as untouchable as the storm that now raged above them. "And what about restraint?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "Do you know how to control that power?" Adrian's smile was thin. "We've had to learn. Power without restraint is self-destruction. We've seen it happen, on our own soil, with our own people. But restraint, it's not weakness, it's a choice, one we make every day." Sera considered his words carefully. It was difficult for her to reconcile the human's brutal history with the calm, collected nature of the people around her. She had expected violence, chaos, but what she found was far more complex. The humans were not mindless savages. They were something else entirely, something far more dangerous. And yet, there was a coldness in their restraint, a kind of detachment that made her uneasy. They spoke of survival and resilience, but there was no warmth in their words, no sense of connection. They endured, but at what cost? Were they truly united in their struggle, or had their hardship fractured them in ways that couldn't be repaired? As they walked deeper into the marketplace, Sera felt the weight of these questions settling on her. She had come here seeking understanding, but the more she saw, the less certain she became. "Tell me," she said, breaking the silence between them. "If survival is your greatest strength, what happens when there's nothing left to fight?" Adrian paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "There's always something to fight." "And if there wasn't," Sera pressed, "what would you become then?" For a moment, Adrian was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, more introspective. "We don't know. Maybe that's why we keep fighting. Maybe we're afraid of what we'd find if we stopped." The honesty in his words struck Sera deeply. It wasn't just about survival for them, it was about purpose. Humanity had defined itself through conflict, through hardship. Without it, they might lose themselves entirely. They reached the end of the marketplace, where the city began to give way to the wilderness beyond. The storm had intensified, the wind howling through the streets, and yet the humans continued on, unbothered by the chaos around them. It was as if they had become immune to it, as if the storm was as much a part of them as the blood in their veins. "Captain," Adrian said, stopping just short of the city's edge, "there's something you should see." He led her to a small, unassuming building on the outskirts of the city. Inside, the air was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. The walls were lined with screens, each displaying images of Earth's history, wars, natural disasters, moments of triumph and tragedy. It was a museum of sorts, though far from the grandiose displays she was used to on other worlds. "This is where we remember," Adrian said quietly. "Where we keep our history, the good and the bad." Sera walked slowly through the room, her eyes scanning the images. There was a rawness to them, a kind of brutal honesty that she hadn't expected. The humans didn't shy away from their past. They faced it head-on, acknowledging their mistakes, their failures, their darkest moments. She stopped in front of one screen, where an image of a war-torn city flickered across the display. The destruction was unimaginable, the devastation complete. And yet, there, in the midst of the rubble, stood a single figure, a human, battered and broken, but still standing. "Who is that?" Sera asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian glanced at the screen, his expression unreadable. "A survivor." As they left the building, the storm had begun to subside, leaving the city washed clean by the rain. Sera turned to Adrian, her mind racing with everything she had seen, everything she had learned. There was so much she still didn't understand, but one thing was clear. Humanity was far more than the simple, dangerous creatures her people had warned her about. They were complex, resilient, and deeply, deeply scarred. And in that complexity, Sera found both hope and fear. "You wanted to know the truth," Adrian said as they walked back into the heart of the city. "Now you have it. We're not monsters, but we're not heroes either. We're just human." Sera nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling in her chest. "That may be the most dangerous thing of all," she said, her voice barely audible over the distant rumble of the storm. Sera moved through the labyrinthine streets, still reeling from the day's revelations. She had expected hostility, arrogance perhaps, from a species as brutal as humanity had been described. What she had not anticipated was this calm undercurrent of danger, the way it seemed to lurk beneath every word, every glance. There was no bravado in the humans she encountered, no overt threat. Yet there was something else in awareness, a readiness that felt more dangerous than any weapon. She could still hear Adrian's voice, low and deliberate, as he walked her through their city. "We've had to fight for everything," he had said, his words as precise and unyielding as the rain that fell around them. "Our land, our resources, our very right to exist." His tone had carried no pride, only fact. It had chilled her, not because of what he said, but because of what lay beneath it, a deep-rooted, almost unconscious understanding of violence. The humans wore it like a second skin. As the evening deepened and the last light faded from the sky, Sera found herself standing before an old structure, weathered and seemingly forgotten amidst the grandeur of the city. This was where Adrian had directed her. Inside, she was told, she would begin to understand. The door creaked open at her touch, and she stepped into a dimly lit hall. The interior was sparse, with high walls that swallowed the light in dark shadows. A figure waited at the far end, and as her eyes adjusted, she recognized him, Elias, the soldier who had been her first introduction to this world. His presence here was not surprising, yet it unsettled her. There was a stillness to him, the same controlled, deliberate nature she had sensed earlier. He stood near a display, something large and covered with a dark cloth. "I thought you'd come," Elias said, his voice cutting through the silence. There was no warmth in his words, but neither was there malice. It was a simple acknowledgement. Sera approached slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure if it was the atmosphere, the darkness, or simply Elias himself that set her on edge. "Adrian said this would help me understand." Elias nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "It will. But understanding is not easy, Captain. It requires you to face truths you may not want to see." Sera's gaze shifted to the covered object. "And what exactly am I supposed to be understanding?" Without another word, Elias reached for the cloth, pulling it away in a smooth, practiced motion. Beneath it stood a creature, encased in glass. Its body was large and powerful, its muscles coiled with latent strength. Its eyes, though frozen in death, still seemed to carry an intensity that made Sera step back involuntarily. She had never seen a creature like this, and yet it felt familiar, hauntingly so. "This," Elias said, "is a lion, one of Earth's apex predators." Sera took another step forward, unable to tear her eyes away from the beast. Its golden mane framed a face of terrifying beauty, its jaws wide and filled with razor-sharp teeth. Even in its stillness, the creature radiated power, an embodiment of raw, unbridled nature. "Lions once roamed the plains of Earth," Elias continued, his voice steady, almost clinical. "They were hunters, efficient, deadly. They worked in prides, groups, to bring down prey much larger than themselves. But they were also solitary killers when the need arose." Sera stared at the lion, trying to reconcile the beauty of the creature with the violence Elias described. There was something majestic about it, a sense of purpose in every muscle, every feature. It wasn't evil, it was simply what it was. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked quietly. Elias turned to face her, his eyes unreadable. "Because this is what shaped us. Lions, wolves, bears, all of Earth's predators. We were never at the top of the food chain, not at first. We had to earn that place." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sera could feel it, the weight of millions of years of evolution, the constant battle for survival that had shaped not just humanity, but the entire planet. Earth was a crucible, a place where only the strongest, the most adaptable, could survive. And humanity had done more than survive, they had thrived. "We learned from them," Elias continued, gesturing to the lion. "Not just how to hunt, but how to think, how to strategize. We became the ultimate predators, not because we were the strongest, but because we were the smartest." Sera felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something terrifying about the way he said it, not as a boast, but as a simple truth. Humans had not been born into dominance. They had clawed their way to it, step by bloody step. Elias moved to the next display, where another creature stood preserved in glass. This one was smaller, sleeker, with a long body and a cunning expression. "This is a wolf," he said, his hand resting on the glass. "Another apex predator. Wolves taught us the importance of the pack, of working together to take down prey far larger than any one of us could handle alone. They are loyal, fiercely so, but they are also ruthless when they need to be." Sera's eyes flicked from the wolf to Elias. There was a subtle parallel there, she realized. The humans, too, were pack creatures. They had learned to work together, to build civilizations, to conquer the harsh environments of their planet. But beneath that cooperation was something darker, something that could turn savage when necessary. "And this," Elias said, moving to the final display, "is a human." The figure in the glass was unlike any Sera had ever seen. It was a human, yes, but not like the ones she had met. This one was ancient, its body lithe and muscular, its face hardened by years of struggle. It held a weapon in one hand, a simple spear, and its eyes were fixed on something unseen, something beyond the glass. "This is what we once were," Elias said, his voice low. "Hunters. Nomads. We fought for survival every day, just like the lion, just like the wolf. But we had something they didn't." Sera tore her eyes from the figure. "What?" Elias's gaze met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, pride, perhaps, or something more primal. "We had fire. We had tools. We had the ability to think beyond the immediate, to plan, to innovate. That's what made us dangerous." He stepped closer to the glass, his voice softening. "But it wasn't just our intelligence that set us apart. It was our will to survive, our refusal to be beaten. No matter how harsh the conditions, no matter how many times we were knocked down, we got back up. We adapted. We evolved." Sera's heart raced as she listened, a growing sense of unease settling in her chest. She had come here to learn, to understand. But the more she learned, the more alien these humans seemed. They were not like her people. They were something else entirely, something she wasn't sure she could fully comprehend. Elias's next words only deepened that feeling. "You see us as predators," he said quietly, "because we are. But we're not predators in the way you think. We don't kill for pleasure or for sport. We kill because we have to, because survival demands it." He turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable once again. "And that's what you need to understand, Captain. Survival isn't about good or evil. It's about necessity. It's about doing what needs to be done, no matter the cost." Sera swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had always believed in peace, in diplomacy, in finding ways to coexist without violence. But here, on this unforgiving planet, those ideals seemed naive, almost childish. These humans had been shaped by a world that cared nothing for peace, that offered no mercy. They had become what they were because they had no other choice. "And what about now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've conquered your world. You've mastered survival. But what happens when there's nothing left to fight?" Elias's gaze flickered, and for a brief moment, she saw something in his eyes, something dark, something that made her stomach tighten. "There's always something to fight," he said quietly. "If not here, then out there." He didn't need to elaborate. Sera knew what he meant. Humanity had conquered Earth, but the stars were full of new challenges, new threats. And just as they had done on their homeworld, the humans would adapt. They would survive, and they would win, no matter the cost. The thought sent a shiver through her. She had come here to understand, but the more she learned, the more she realized how little she truly knew. Humanity was not just another species. They were something far more dangerous. They were predators, yes, but they were also something else. Something deeper, something more primal, and that made them a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Later that night, Sera found herself standing on a balcony overlooking the city. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and clean. Below her, the lights of the city glowed softly, a reminder of the life that pulsed within its walls. But even now, in this moment of quiet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying. She had seen the predators that had shaped humanity, had felt the weight of their history pressing down on her. But it wasn't the lions, or the wolves, or even the ancient human figure that haunted her now. It was something else, something far more unsettling. It was the realization that humans were not defined by their capacity for violence, but by their capacity to adapt. They were not simply predators, they were survivors, and that made them the most dangerous creatures she had ever encountered. As the night deepened and the stars emerged one by one, Sera knew that her journey of understanding was far from over. She had only scratched the surface of what humanity truly was, and as much as it terrified her, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of fascination as well. Because in the end, survival wasn't just about strength or intelligence. It was about will, and in that, the humans were unmatched. The night had crept upon the city in silence. The lights from the towering structures flickered to life as if called by the dimming sun, casting an ethereal glow on the streets below. Sera stood at the entrance to a grand hall, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar architecture. The humans seemed to have mastered a delicate balance between cold functionality and a kind of beauty she couldn't quite define. Everything had its place. Yet there was an elegance in the arrangement, a subtle artistry that seemed almost accidental. She had been invited to this event by Adrian, the human diplomat, but his presence was nowhere to be seen. Instead, she was alone, a stranger in this crowd of unfamiliar faces. It was a formal gathering. She had been told a rare occasion where humans from various walks of life came together to share ideas, discuss politics, and solidify alliances. She was hesitant to step inside. Not out of fear she had faced dangers far greater than a room full of human elites, but because there was something she couldn't yet define about these people. Every encounter she had with them left her more unsettled. They didn't act like the other species she had encountered. They didn't need to posture or project their power. It was simply there, woven into the fabric of their being. Gathering her composure, Sera crossed the threshold into the hall. The air inside was warm, buzzing with low conversation and the occasional clink of glasses. The guests were dressed in formal attire, the men in tailored suits and the women in elegant gowns, each outfit perfectly chosen to reflect a mixture of status and personal style. As she moved through the crowd, she noticed the subtleties in their interactions: nods, glances, a brush of a hand here and there. There was a silent language being spoken, one she had no understanding of. Her eyes scanned the room for familiar faces, but instead, they landed on a figure standing by one of the large windows at the far side of the room. Elias. His face, even from a distance, held that same calm intensity she had noticed before, a quiet ferocity that seemed to radiate from him without effort. He was dressed as impeccably as the others, but there was something about him that set him apart. It wasn't his posture, which was relaxed but alert, nor was it his expression, which betrayed nothing beyond casual interest in his surroundings. It was something deeper, something intrinsic. Without realizing it, Sera found herself moving toward him. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps it was something more, a need to understand this man, this embodiment of everything that unsettled her about humanity. As she approached, his gaze shifted, locking onto hers with that same piercing focus. He didn't smile, but there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Captain," he greeted her, his voice steady, measured. "Elias," she replied, unsure how to begin. For a moment, they stood in silence, the sounds of the gathering fading into the background. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged, as if both were waiting for the other to make the first move. "I didn't expect to see you here," Sera finally said, her voice low but steady. "I thought this was a diplomatic event." Elias's gaze didn't waver. "It is. But diplomacy and warfare are often closer than people think." Sera frowned at his response. There it was again, that blurring of lines, the way the humans seemed to see the world in shades of gray, rather than black and white. To her, diplomacy had always been the opposite of war. Yet here, in this strange place, the two seemed to coexist, intertwined in ways she couldn't quite grasp. "You don't believe in peace, do you?" she asked, her words sharper than she intended. Elias tilted his head slightly, considering her question. "I believe in survival. Peace is just a means to that end. When it's useful, we embrace it. When it's not..." He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Sera took a deep breath, trying to push down the frustration building inside her. "That's not how the rest of the galaxy works. We found ways to resolve conflict without violence, to coexist without destruction." For the first time, Elias smiled, though it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was a knowing, almost amused expression, as if he had heard this argument many times before. "Maybe," he said, "but how often does that last?" Sera felt her hands clench at her sides. She wanted to argue, to push back against his cynicism, but there was something in his tone that stopped her. It wasn't arrogance, it was experience. Elias wasn't speaking from theory or ideology, he was speaking from a lifetime of witnessing the world as it was, not as it should be. "You think we're broken," he continued, his voice softer now. "I can see it in your eyes. You look at us, and you see a people shaped by chaos and violence, and you're not wrong. But that's only part of the story. Sera's gaze narrowed. And what's the other part? Elias turned back toward the window, his eyes scanning the city below. We survive because we adapt. We've learned that sometimes, in order to protect what we care about, we have to be willing to fight, to hurt, to kill, if necessary. His words were measured, but there was no emotion behind them, no sense of pride or regret. It was simply the truth. But it's not all we are, he added after a moment. We fight because we have to, not because we want to. You think we thrive on violence, but it's the opposite. We're capable of immense love, of compassion. We build, we create, we nurture. But when those things are threatened, we don't hesitate to do what needs to be done. Sera felt her heart race as she listened. She had always believed in the capacity for good, for peace. But here was a species that seemed to live in a constant state of duality, balancing creation and destruction, love and violence. It was unsettling, not because of the violence itself, but because of how naturally it seemed to coexist with everything else. "Is that why you're here?" she asked quietly. "To remind me of that duality?" Elias shook his head. "No, I'm here because I wanted you to see that the mask we wear isn't just for show. You look at us, and you see the aggression, the capacity for violence. But you don't see what's behind it. We're not monsters, Captain. We're just people, trying to survive in a universe that doesn't give second chances." There was a weight to his words that Sera couldn't ignore. She had seen violence before, had witnessed the horrors of war. But with the humans, it was different. It wasn't driven by greed or malice, it was driven by something deeper, something primal, and that scared her more than anything else. As they stood in silence, Sera found herself looking at Elias in a new light. He wasn't just a soldier, a weapon waiting to be unleashed. He was a man, shaped by a world that had demanded everything from him. And in that, she realized, he was no different from any other human she had met. They were all products of their environment, shaped by the harsh realities of Earth. But that didn't make them any less dangerous. "You said you don't believe in peace," she said after a long pause. "But what about hope?" Elias turned to her, his eyes softening for the first time. "Hope is a dangerous thing, Captain. It can drive people to do incredible things, but it can also blind them to reality. We hope for peace, for a better future, but we don't rely on it. We prepare for the worst, even as we hope for the best." Sera stared at him, her mind racing. There was a depth to his words that she hadn't expected, a complexity that went beyond simple pragmatism. The humans were not a monolith of aggression and violence. They were a people constantly grappling with their own duality, trying to find a way to balance the light and the dark within them. And in that moment, Sera realized something profound. The humans were not just survivors, they were adapters. They had learned to live with their own darkness, to embrace it when necessary, but never to let it consume them. It was a lesson she hadn't anticipated, but one that resonated deeply within her. "I don't know if I can see the world the way you do," she admitted quietly. Elias smiled again, though this time it was softer, almost understanding. "You don't have to. But you should understand that we're not so different from you. We all have our masks, Captain. The difference is, we know when to take them off." As the night wore on, Sera found herself wandering through the crowd once more. The conversations around her were lively, filled with laughter and animated discussion. Yet, beneath the surface, she could sense the same tension she had felt in Elias, the same unspoken understanding that violence and survival were never far apart. She watched as Adrian moved through the crowd, his presence commanding but never overt. He was a diplomat, yes, but there was something else there, a quiet strength, a readiness that mirrored what she had seen in Elias. It was in all of them, she realized. This quiet ferocity, this ability to move seamlessly between peace and war, love and violence. It was what made them so dangerous, so unpredictable. And yet, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of admiration. These humans, for all their flaws, had found a way to survive in a galaxy that demanded everything from them. They had adapted, had learned to navigate the chaos without losing themselves completely. It was a lesson she wasn't sure she was ready to learn. But standing there, among them, she knew one thing for certain. The humans were far more than the sum of their violence. They were a force to be reckoned with, not because of their strength, but because of their will. And that, Sera realized, was what made them truly terrifying. The training grounds were vast, a sprawling testament to the military precision of humanity. It stretched out before Sera and the alien delegation like an endless expanse of cold steel and ordered chaos. The atmosphere was strangely still, only interrupted by the occasional distant clanging of weapons or the muffled thud of boots against the hard surface. As the group walked, the faint sounds became sharper, more distinct the whirring of drones overhead, the synchronized grunts of soldiers engaged in hand-to-hand combat. Sera couldn't shake the sense of unease that crept up her spine. It wasn't just the presence of so many human soldiers, though that was part of it. It was the way they moved, the way they operated as one cohesive unit, as if connected by an invisible thread. There was an efficiency to it, a purpose that she hadn't witnessed in other species' military forces. For humans, this wasn't just training, it was survival. The alien delegation, composed of various species, walked in cautious silence. Their eyes widened in quiet disbelief at the sight of humans, seemingly calm and collected, yet capable of such controlled violence. The contrast was startling. The delegation had arrived expecting arrogance, perhaps bravado, a show of force meant to intimidate or impress. Instead, what they found was something far more unsettling: competence. Sera's gaze drifted toward Elias, who stood a few paces ahead, his posture relaxed but alert. He was dressed in standard military gear, though there was an ease in the way he wore it that set him apart from the others. His eyes were fixed on the soldiers in front of them, but there was no sense of pride or satisfaction in his expression. It was more like observation, as if he were studying the soldiers, assessing their movements, their weaknesses, their potential. "This is how you train?" one of the alien dignitaries finally asked, his voice barely concealing the shock. His species, known for its peaceful ways, had no equivalent to what was unfolding before them. Elias turned his gaze toward the dignitary, his expression unreadable. "This is how we survive." The dignitary faltered, clearly struggling to reconcile the scene before him with the image he had held of humanity. Sera felt a strange, conflicted empathy for the alien. She had been in his place once, unsure of how to process the reality of what humans were capable of. But now, standing beside them, she was beginning to understand that this brutality was not mindless, it was purposeful, calculated. Sera had been briefed about the session they were to witness. It was nothing more than a routine exercise, meant to simulate close-quarters combat in hostile environments. But routine for humans, she had come to learn, was vastly different from routine for other species. For humans, routine was precision, efficiency. Everything was a lesson, everything had meaning, even if it wasn't immediately apparent. As they approached the training area, Sera noticed the way the soldiers' movements were almost choreographed. Each one knew their role, their place in the intricate web of combat that was unfolding before them. And yet, there was no hesitation, no second-guessing. It was as if they had been born for this, molded by some unseen hand into perfect instruments of war. "They're so focused," one of the other alien delegates muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Sera nodded absently, though her attention remained fixed on Elias. He had that same focus, that same quiet intensity that she had come to associate with him. It was unsettling, yet oddly comforting at the same time. There was something in his demeanor, in the way he carried himself, that made her feel like she was standing beside a force of nature. He wasn't just a soldier, he was the embodiment of everything that humanity had become in its quest to survive. Elias turned to Sera, his expression softening slightly as he spoke. "You've seen combat before, haven't you?" It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of something deeper. Sera hesitated, unsure how to respond. Of course she had seen combat, she had fought in wars, had led her people through battles that had left scars on her soul. But this was different. Human combat wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about survival, about ensuring that the species itself continued. "I have," she said slowly, her voice measured. "But not like this. Not with this precision." Elias nodded, as if he had expected her response. "We don't fight for glory," he said quietly. "We fight because we have no choice. We fight because the alternative is extinction." Sera looked at him, her mind swirling with questions she didn't know how to ask. There was a starkness to his words, a finality that made her uncomfortable. It was a reminder that for humans, war was not a distant concept, it was a constant reality, one that shaped every aspect of their existence. "What about peace?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias's gaze shifted, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Peace," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Peace is a luxury, one we've never had the privilege of indulging in for long." There was no bitterness in his tone, no resentment. It was simply a fact, one that he had long since accepted. Sera felt a pang of something she couldn't quite identify, pity, perhaps, or maybe a deeper understanding of the burden that humans carried. As they continued to watch the training unfold, Sera found herself wrestling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she admired the humans' resilience, their ability to adapt and survive in the face of overwhelming odds. But on the other hand, she was deeply disturbed by the brutality that seemed to define them. How could a species so capable of compassion, of love, also be so proficient in the art of destruction? "You think we're violent," Elias said suddenly, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "That's what's troubling you, isn't it?" Sera blinked, startled by the accuracy of his observation. She hadn't expected him to see through her so easily. But then again, nothing about Elias was what she expected. "I don't know what to think," she admitted, her voice low. "You're not like any species I've encountered before. You confuse me." Elias's lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "We confuse ourselves sometimes," he said, almost to himself. "But violence isn't what defines us. It's just a tool, a means to an end." Sera frowned. "And what is that end?" Elias's gaze darkened, his expression becoming unreadable once more. "Survival," he said simply. "The same thing every species strives for. The only difference is that we've learned to accept what that means. We've learned that sometimes survival requires sacrifice." Sera fell silent, unsure how to respond. There was a truth in his words that she couldn't deny, but it was a truth that unsettled her deeply. It was one thing to fight for survival, it was another to embrace the brutality that came with it. As the training session came to an end, the soldiers dispersed, their movements precise even in rest. The alien delegation remained in stunned silence, clearly struggling to process what they had just witnessed. But Sera's mind was elsewhere. Her thoughts were consumed by Elias, by the strange pull she felt toward him, and by the conflicting emotions that warred within her. There was something about him, something that both fascinated and frightened her. He was a soldier, yes, but he was also more than that. He was a reflection of humanity itself, capable of both immense destruction and profound compassion. And it was that duality, that contradiction, that drew her in. "I still don't understand you," she said quietly, more to herself than to Elias. Elias turned to her, his expression softening for a brief moment. "You don't have to understand us, Captain," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You just have to accept that we are what we are." Sera looked at him, her heart racing as she tried to make sense of the emotions swirling inside her. She didn't know if she could accept it, if she could reconcile the humanity she had come to admire with the brutality she had come to fear. But as she stood beside Elias, watching the soldiers move with the precision of a well-oiled machine, she realized that she didn't have a choice. Humans were a force of nature, shaped by a world that had demanded everything from them. They had adapted, had learned to survive in a universe that offered no mercy, and in that, they had become something both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Sera felt a deep, unsettling connection to them, to Elias in particular. He represented everything that fascinated and frightened her about humanity, and as much as she wanted to distance herself from it, she couldn't. There was a pull, an undeniable gravity that kept drawing her closer, even as her mind screamed for her to stay away. "I don't know if I can ever see the world the way you do," she admitted quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the training grounds. Elias didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked out over the soldiers, his expression contemplative. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost resigned. "You don't have to, Sera. But you should understand that the world doesn't care how we see it. It only cares whether we survive." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket, suffocating in its simplicity. Survival. That was the core of everything, the driving force behind humanity's relentless march forward. Sera stood at the edge of the forest, her breath shallow as the heavy scent of damp earth filled her lungs. The air was thick, almost oppressive, a reminder that this was not her world. It was their world. Earth, home to the species she had thought she was beginning to understand, yet now seemed more alien than ever. In front of her, the trees stretched out like jagged teeth, each one bent under the weight of an ancient, unforgiving ecosystem. It was alive, vibrant, but also dangerous in ways she had never encountered. This was a place shaped by predators, not just in form but in spirit. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced between the foliage, giving the forest an almost primal feeling. Sera's skin prickled with unease, her senses heightened by the knowledge that danger was not just present, it was everywhere. She knew the hunt would begin soon. It was why they had come here, after all, to witness what she had been assured was a key part of human survival. Elias had called it a lesson in adaptability, but there was something else beneath his words. Pride, perhaps, or something darker, something she couldn't yet name. Sera's gaze drifted toward Elias, who stood a few paces ahead, his posture relaxed but alert. He had changed into hunting gear, a blend of camouflage and lightweight armor that clung to his form with ease. There was an air of calm about him, a stillness that she had learned to associate with danger. He seemed at home here, in this wild, unforgiving landscape. It was unsettling to realize that, in many ways, this environment mirrored the humans themselves, beautiful, resilient, and utterly lethal. "You're ready?" Elias asked, turning to face her, his eyes steady and unflinching. There was no trace of hesitation in his voice, just quiet assurance. He expected her to follow, to witness what was to come without turning away. Sera nodded, though the knot in her stomach tightened. She wasn't sure she was ready, but that didn't seem to matter. She had come this far, seen so much of what made humanity both terrifying and compelling. To stop now would feel like a failure, not just to herself, but to the understanding she was chasing. "This won't be like the simulations," Elias continued, his tone matter of fact. "No controlled environments, no safeties. Out here, everything is real. If you want to understand us, you have to see us at our most natural." At our most natural. The words echoed in her mind, leaving her with an uneasy sensation. What did that mean, exactly? She had seen humans in combat, had watched them execute maneuvers with precision that bordered on mechanical. But this felt different. This wasn't war. This was something older, something primal. The trees creaked as a breeze swept through the forest, momentarily breaking the stillness. Sera took a deep breath and steeled herself for what was to come. Elias gestured toward the group of hunters gathered nearby. There were 5 of them, all human, all with the same focused intensity in their eyes. They spoke in low murmurs, checking their weapons and gear with practiced efficiency. The air around them was charged, as if they were more attuned to the pulse of the forest than anything Sera could understand. "They're not soldiers," Elias said, almost as if reading her thoughts. "At least, not in the way you think. These people are hunters. They've spent their lives honing their skills, not for war, but for survival. Out here, it's a different kind of battlefield." Sera's gaze followed the hunters as they moved deeper into the woods, their movements swift and silent. They disappeared into the shadows, becoming one with a landscape in a way that seemed impossible for beings so noticeable. Humans had a presence, a weight that made them difficult to overlook, and yet these hunters vanished with ease, blending into their surroundings like predators stalking their prey. Sera hesitated for a moment before following. Every step felt deliberate, careful. She was out of her element here, in a world that had been shaped by millennia of struggle between predator and prey. Earth's wildlife was infamous across the galaxy, creatures so deadly that even the most advanced civilizations thought twice before venturing into its wilderness unprepared. And yet, humans thrived here. They didn't just survive, they conquered. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the atmosphere grew heavier, almost oppressive. The trees closed in around them, their branches twisting into shapes that seemed to mock any semblance of safety. Strange noises echoed from the distance, unfamiliar calls, rustling leaves, the occasional guttural growl that sent a chill down Sera's spine. "It's the creatures that shaped us," Elias said softly as they walked, his voice barely audible over the ambient sounds of the forest. "This world, it wasn't kind. It never gave us anything for free. Every inch of progress we made, we had to fight for it. We had to become predators because if we didn't, we'd be prey." Sera glanced at him, her mind swirling with questions she wasn't sure how to articulate. There was a darkness in his words, a history that ran deeper than any single lifetime. It wasn't just about survival, it was about adaptation, evolution. Humans had been forged in the crucible of this harsh world, molded by its dangers into something formidable, something nearly unrecognizable from the species they had once been. "You take pride in that," she observed quietly, her tone more contemplative than accusatory. Elias looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Pride? I don't know if that's the right word, but we understand what it means. We've learned that to survive, we had to embrace what this world demanded of us." The word embrace hung in the air like a challenge. Was it truly something to be embraced? Sera wasn't sure. She had always thought of civilization as a way to transcend the base instincts of survival, to build something greater, something more meaningful. But here, on this world, civilization and savagery seemed intertwined, inseparable. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the air. One of the hunters had spotted something movement, just beyond the clearing. Sera tensed, her heart racing as she instinctively scanned the area, but she saw nothing. The hunters, however, moved into position with alarming speed and coordination, their bodies low to the ground, their weapons raised. Sera followed Elias's gaze, and then she saw a shadow moving between the trees, large and silent. It was a predator, though unlike any she had ever seen before. Its movements were slow, deliberate, as if it were testing the air, sensing the presence of intruders in its domain. The creature was massive, its dark fur blending into the shadows, making it difficult to discern its full shape. But there was no mistaking its power, the raw lethality that radiated from its every step. Sera felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't just a predator. This was an apex predator, one that had ruled this land long before humans had ever learned to wield tools. The hunters remained still, their eyes locked on the creature as it moved closer. Sera could feel the tension in the air, the electric charge of anticipation that rippled through the group. And then, without warning, the lead hunter made a barely perceptible hand signal. The others responded in kind, their movements almost imperceptible as they shifted into position. Sera's heart raced as she watched the scene unfold. There was a beauty to it, a strange, primal dance between predator and prey, though in this case it was impossible to tell who held the upper hand. The hunters moved with a quiet confidence, their bodies attuned to the rhythms of the forest in a way that seemed almost unnatural. Suddenly, there was a flash of movement. The creature lunged, its massive jaws snapping at the air as it charged toward the hunters. But they were ready. In an instant, they sprang into action, their weapons firing in quick succession. The air was filled with the sharp crack of gunfire, followed by the deafening roar of the beast as it staggered back, wounded but not yet defeated. Sera watched in stunned silence as the hunters continued their assault, their movements precise and unrelenting. There was no hesitation, no wasted energy. Every shot, every step was calculated, designed to bring down their prey as efficiently as possible. And yet, despite the brutality of the scene, there was a strange elegance to it, a dance of death that spoke of millennia of evolution, of survival in its purest form. The creature let out one final, desperate roar before collapsing to the ground, its massive body shaking the earth beneath it. The forest fell silent once more, the only sound the ragged breaths of the hunters as they surveyed their kill. Sera stood frozen, her mind racing as she tried to process what she had just witnessed. This was not war. This was not the organized chaos of battle she had seen humans engage in before. This was something older, something primal, and it terrified her. "You see now," Elias said quietly, his voice breaking the silence. "This is who we are. We are predators, shaped by a world that offered us nothing but death. We learned to hunt, to kill, because it was the only way to survive." Sera turned to him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Is that all you are?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Predators?" Elias's gaze softened, though there was no warmth in his eyes. "No," he said softly, "but it's a part of us. A part we can't deny, no matter how much we try to bury it." Sera's mind swirled with conflicting emotions: fear, awe, fascination, and something else she couldn't quite name. She had come to this world seeking understanding, seeking to bridge the gap between her species and humanity. But now, as she stood in the shadow of this ancient forest, she realized that the gulf between them was wider than she had ever imagined. And yet, she couldn't look away. The hunt was over, but something had shifted within her. She had seen the raw, lethal efficiency of humanity in its most natural state, and while it unnerved her, it also captivated her in a way she hadn't expected. There was a beauty to it, a terrible, savage beauty that called to something deep within her soul. As they made their way back through the forest, Sera found herself lost in thought, her mind turning over the questions that now plagued her. Was violence inherent to survival? Was civilization nothing more than a thin veneer, masking the savagery that lay beneath? And if that was the case, what did it mean for her own people, for the ideals they held so dear? She glanced at Elias, who walked beside her with the same calm, steady presence he always had. He was a soldier, a warrior, but now she understood that he was something more. He was a predator, shaped by a world that demanded strength, cunning, and the ability to kill without hesitation. But was that all there was to him, to them? Sera's thoughts spiraled as she wrestled with the questions that now seemed impossible to answer. The line between savagery and civilization blurred in her mind, leaving her adrift in a sea of uncertainty. And for the first time, she wondered if she would ever truly understand. The atmosphere of Earth shifted as Sera and Elias approached the human settlement, where the air was thick with anticipation and the subtle tension that accompanied every significant event. Today marked a unique occasion, a ceremony to honor those who had passed, a celebration steeped in the rich tapestry of human history and belief. For Sera, this event represented an opportunity to delve deeper into the complex relationship humans had with death and mortality, something her own people had always shied away from discussing. As they entered the central plaza, the stark contrast between the vibrant life surrounding them and the solemnity of the occasion settled over Sera like a shroud. Humans milled about, dressed in muted colors, their faces reflective as they prepared to pay homage to their deceased. Rituals were a thread woven through the fabric of human culture, and this one was no different. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls of the plaza, while the air was rich with the scent of burning sage, a grounding presence amidst the swirling emotions. Elias guided Sera to a space where people had gathered, their expressions a blend of sorrow and reverence. The essence of humanity lay bare before her, and she felt the weight of their collective grief and gratitude. As the ceremony commenced, a speaker stepped forward, an elder with silver hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to carry the burden of many lifetimes. His voice, steady yet filled with emotion, resonated through the crowd. Today, we gather to honor those who have walked before us. In our lives, we embrace the inevitable. Death is not our enemy, but a part of the journey. Sera felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had witnessed countless civilizations, each with their own perceptions of mortality, yet nothing had prepared her for this. Humans did not merely acknowledge death, they embraced it, interwoven into their lives in a way that revealed both their strength and vulnerability. To them, death was not an end, but a passage, a transformation. As the ceremony unfolded, Sera listened to stories of loss and love, of triumphs and failures, woven together into a narrative that transcended individual experiences. Each tale shared was a testament to the connections humans formed, the legacies they created. Tears streamed down faces, yet there was laughter too, a mingling of sorrow and joy that seemed uniquely human. In contrast to her own species, who saw death as something to be feared and avoided, Sera began to comprehend the depth of the human experience. Their acceptance of mortality was both empowering and unsettling. How could they stand so close to something so terrifying? This dance with death exposed the duality of their existence, their capacity for violence intertwined with profound empathy. When the elders spoke of the struggles faced by those who had passed, Sera's thoughts turned to her own people. In their world, the pursuit of peace overshadowed the complexity of existence. Their utopian ideals had, perhaps, dulled their understanding of what it meant to be truly alive. Was this strength or a form of denial? Elias stood beside her, a steady presence, and she glanced at him. His gaze was fixed on the elder, yet she sensed his awareness of her turmoil. "What do you think?" he asked, breaking the reverent silence that surrounded them. "I'm processing," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "The way they view death, it's different. They embrace it, rather than shy away." Elias nodded, his expression contemplative. "We understand that death is a part of life. It gives meaning to our experiences. It shapes our connections. Without it, what do we truly cherish?" His words resonated within her. The human capacity to kill was but one facet of a complex emotional spectrum, juxtaposed with their ability to love deeply and fiercely. Sera grappled with the paradox: was it this intricate dance with death that allowed them to form such profound emotional bonds? In that moment, her understanding of humanity shifted once more. As the ceremony reached its climax, the crowd joined together in a song, a haunting melody that echoed through the plaza. The harmony resonated with sorrow, yet carried an undercurrent of hope, a celebration of life intertwined with the inevitability of death. Sera closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her, each note a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Yet, amid the beauty of the moment, doubt flickered within her. Sera had come to Earth with a mission, her heart torn between her role as a diplomat and the unsettling truths she had uncovered. Trusting humans felt like a precarious leap into the unknown. Could she truly embrace the complexities of their nature, knowing the potential for violence that lurked beneath their surface? The ceremony concluded, and people began to disperse, lingering in quiet conversations, their eyes glistening with the remnants of shared grief. Sera turned to Elias, her heart heavy with the weight of her thoughts. This connection they have with death, it's profound. But how can I reconcile this with the potential danger that lies within? Elias regarded her with a steady gaze. Every species has its strengths and weaknesses. We are both capable of great love and profound destruction. The question is how we choose to navigate that duality. As they left the plaza, the setting sun bathed the city in warm hues, casting long shadows that danced across the cobblestone streets. Sera felt the weight of her internal conflict pressing down on her chest. The shadows seemed to mirror her thoughts, an eternal struggle between light and dark, creation and destruction. Days turned into weeks, and as Sera immersed herself in the intricacies of human culture, her connection with Elias deepened. Their conversations ranged from philosophical discussions to shared laughter, revealing layers of understanding that transcended the divide between their species. Yet, the underlying tension remained a constant reminder of the choice she faced. One evening, while watching the stars emerge in the twilight sky, Sera broached the subject that had been gnawing at her mind. "Elias, do you believe it's possible for humanity to coexist with other races without the shadow of violence? Can you trust your instincts, knowing that they can lead to destruction?" Elias paused, his gaze fixed on the stars. "Trust is a fragile thing, Sera. It requires vulnerability. We are not only warriors, we are builders, creators. But there are times when the darkness within us surfaces. It's a part of who we are. The question is not whether we can eliminate that darkness, but how we choose to manage it." Sera contemplated his words, feeling the weight of her role pressing down on her. Her mission was to assess humanity's potential for peaceful coexistence with the galaxy. Yet, her growing bond with Elias complicated everything. She found herself torn between loyalty to her people and the undeniable connection she felt with him. One fateful night, as they walked through the city, their conversation turned serious. "Sera, there are decisions being made at the highest levels regarding your mission here. You must understand the stakes," Elias said, his voice low and intense. "What do you mean?" she asked, confusion mingling with concern. "Some view Earth as a threat, a world steeped in violence. They believe it should remain isolated, that humanity's potential for destruction outweighs the possibility of collaboration." Sera's heart raced. "But what I've seen, what I've experienced here is different. There's more to humanity than mere aggression. Your superiors may not see it that way. You need to decide where your loyalties lie. Will you fight for understanding, or will you report back that Earth should remain in isolation?" The weight of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. She felt the suffocating pressure of her impending choice, the potential ramifications echoing in her mind. She was not merely an observer anymore. She was entwined in the destiny of a world that challenged her understanding of life and death. The next day, as she prepared for her meeting with the council, her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Should she advocate for humanity, risking her own standing with her people? Or should she uphold the beliefs of her own race, sealing Earth's fate? With a heavy heart, Sera entered the council chamber. The stark walls and cold surfaces reflected the tension in the air, a palpable anxiety that matched her own. As she faced her peers, the weight of her decision bore down on her. "Captain Valan," the council leader began, his voice authoritative, "you have been tasked with assessing humanity's capacity for peace. What is your conclusion?" Sera's voice trembled as she responded. "Humanity is a paradox. They embrace death as a part of life, which has granted them a depth of understanding that many species lack. Their capacity for violence is undeniable, yet so is their capacity for love and empathy." She paused, searching their faces for understanding. To isolate Earth would be to deny the potential for collaboration. They are not merely predators. They are also creators, builders of culture and connection. They must be given a chance to prove their intentions. A silence enveloped the room, heavy with contemplation. The eyes of the council bore into her, searching for hidden motives. Sera held her ground, feeling the weight of her convictions propelling her forward. Finally, the leader spoke. "Your insights are valuable, but the dangers are real. We cannot dismiss the threat that violence poses. Your loyalty will be tested, Captain Valan. Choose wisely." As she left the chamber, her heart raced. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but for the first time, she felt a flicker of clarity. The nexus of life and death that she had witnessed on Earth was not merely a philosophical concept. It was a testament to the complexity of existence. Sera stood at a crossroads, torn between duty and understanding, between the safety of her own people and the allure of a connection that transcended boundaries. The choice she faced was not simply about her mission. It was about embracing the intricate tapestry of life itself. In the days that followed, she met with Elias often, sharing her fears and doubts. Their conversations grew more profound, their connection deepening, as they explored the intricacies of their respective cultures. One evening, beneath a blanket of stars, she turned to him, her voice laced with urgency. "Elias, do you think we can change the perception of your people? Can we show them that humanity is more than just its capacity for destruction?" Elias regarded her, his expression thoughtful. "Change takes time, Sera. It requires courage, vulnerability, and a willingness to confront the darkness within us. But if we stand together, if we cultivate understanding, there is hope." His words lingered in the air, a promise of possibility that resonated within her. As she gazed into his eyes, she understood that her journey was no longer about merely observing humanity. It was about becoming an integral part of their story. With each passing day, Sera felt the pull of her loyalties shift, like the currents of a vast ocean. The nexus of life and death had become a defining point in her journey, a convergence of understanding that illuminated the path ahead. As she prepared for the upcoming council meeting, she felt a newfound sense of purpose. She was ready to advocate for humanity, to embrace the complexities that had so captivated her. This was not just a choice for herself, but a step towards a future that embraced the duality of existence. The time had come to challenge perceptions, to weave together the threads of connection that transcended the boundaries of life and death. And in doing so, Sera would not only shape her own destiny, but perhaps the destiny of an entire species. In the wake of the council's deliberation, Sera found herself navigating a landscape fraught with uncertainty. The weight of her choices pressed upon her, a relentless reminder of the complexities inherent in understanding humanity. Each interaction with Elias peeled back layers of perception, revealing a soldier shaped by the relentless tides of war and survival. As evening descended, Sera and Elias found refuge in a secluded grove on the outskirts of the settlement. The air was thick with the scent of blooming night flowers, their soft fragrance intermingling with the earthiness of the surrounding forest. Moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows that danced at their feet. This moment felt sacred, a pause amid the chaos of their respective lives. Elias leaned against a sturdy tree trunk, his posture relaxed yet alert. There was a stillness about him, a quiet strength that contrasted with the turmoil brewing within Sera. She turned to him, her curiosity piqued. "What was it like for you, Elias? In the war, what did you experience that shaped you?" He hesitated, the flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. "It's difficult to articulate," he finally replied, his voice steady yet laced with an undercurrent of emotion. "War isn't just about battles, it's about decisions that haunt you long after the fighting stops." Sera listened intently, her heart racing as she sensed the weight of his memories. "Tell me," she urged, her voice soft yet insistent. "I want to understand." With a deep breath, Elias closed his eyes for a moment, as if summoning the ghosts of his past. "I joined the military when I was young, full of ideals. I wanted to protect my home, my family. But once you're in the thick of it, you realize that the lines blur. You see comrades fall, and the weight of leadership becomes unbearable. I was responsible for lives, yet I watched as choices led to loss." The shadows around them deepened, cloaking the grove in a heavy silence. Sera's mind raced, envisioning the chaos of combat, the raw emotion of life and death hanging in the balance. "How do you cope with that? With the burden of having made those choices?" Elias opened his eyes, the depth of his gaze revealing a storm of emotions. "You don't. You carry it with you. Some days are easier than others, but the scars remain. It's a constant reminder of the fragility of life. I've lost friends, brothers who believed in the same ideals I did. Their absence is a void that can never be filled." Sera felt a pang of empathy, an understanding blooming within her as she connected the threads of his experiences to her own journey. "But you're still here. You still fight. Why?" "Because I believe in a future worth fighting for," he said, a flicker of determination igniting in his eyes. "Every moment spent in that world taught me the value of life. I may carry the weight of my past, but it's what fuels my resolve. I fight for those who can't, for the hope of something better." In that moment, Sera saw beyond the facade of the soldier. Elias was not just a warrior. He was a man who had witnessed the depths of despair and emerged with a quiet tenacity. His past was not merely a collection of scars, it was a testament to resilience. "I never understood that before," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always seen humans as inherently violent, but now I see the struggle beneath the surface." Elias's gaze softened. "It's easy to label an entire species based on actions, but every individual carries their own story, their own pain, and within that pain lies a capacity for change." Sera felt a stirring within her, a profound realization that the barriers she had erected were beginning to crumble. Elias represented the complexity of humanity, the duality of creation and destruction interwoven within a single heart. In the depth of his vulnerability, she found an unexpected connection, a bridge spanning the divide between their worlds. As they spoke, the moon ascended higher in the sky, casting a silvery glow that illuminated the grove. The stillness around them allowed for introspection, each heartbeat echoing the rhythm of their shared existence. Sera considered her own journey, the teachings of her people, the unwavering commitment to peace, the avoidance of violence at all costs. Yet here she was, captivated by a soldier's strength, a warrior whose very existence challenged her perceptions. What if my people could see this? Sera mused aloud. The humanity behind the soldier, would it change their perspective? Elias smiled, a hint of warmth breaking through the shadows of his past. Change begins with understanding. It takes courage to look beyond the surface. Your mission could be the first step toward that understanding. His words struck a chord deep within her, igniting a sense of purpose. Sera realized that her role as a diplomat extended beyond mere observation. It was an opportunity to bridge the gaps between species, to cultivate empathy where there was once only fear. But that path was fraught with danger both externally, from those who would resist change, and internally, as she grappled with her growing respect for humanity. As the night deepened, they shared more stories, tales of family, hopes, dreams, and losses. Each revelation wove them closer together, breaking down the walls of distrust that had previously defined their relationship. For Sera, the realization was bittersweet. The deeper her bond with Elias grew, the more complicated her mission became. "Tell me about your family," Elias prompted, genuine curiosity in his voice. "What are they like?" Sera hesitated, the thought of her family stirring a blend of nostalgia and sadness within her. "My people value tranquility above all else. We've created a society built on cooperation and mutual respect. But I often wonder if we've sacrificed too much in our pursuit of peace." Elias nodded, encouraging her to continue. "In the absence of conflict, do you feel you've lost something?" "Yes," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "We've lost the richness of struggle, the lessons that come from adversity. I've witnessed so many worlds, each grappling with their own challenges. Yet, my people remain untouched by the harsh realities of existence. We've created a bubble, insulated from the very truths that define life." "Maybe that's why you're here," Elias suggested, leaning closer. "To witness those truths firsthand, to understand that even in darkness, there can be light." His words hung in the air, resonating with Sera's own internal conflict. As she contemplated her purpose, the weight of her duty pressed upon her. How could she advocate for humanity while still holding on to her own beliefs? The path forward was shrouded in uncertainty, but with Elias by her side, she felt emboldened to confront the questions that lingered in her heart. With a newfound sense of clarity, Sera gazed at Elias, the quiet soldier who had opened her eyes to the beauty and brutality of humanity. "I want to understand your world better. Not just the surface, but the depth of your experiences. I want to know what it truly means to be human." Elias regarded her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Then come with me. I'll show you the heart of a soldier, the struggles we face, the sacrifices we make, and the hope that fuels us. But be warned, it won't be easy." Sera nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "I'm ready." In the days that followed, Elias introduced Sera to various aspects of military life. She observed training sessions where soldiers honed their skills with unwavering focus. The precision and discipline were striking, each movement executed with a purpose that revealed the complexities of their world. Yet, it was not just the physicality of the soldiers that struck her, it was the camaraderie, the bonds forged through shared experiences. As Sera immersed herself in this new reality, she witnessed the unspoken language of trust that defined their interactions. The soldiers relied on one another, their lives intertwined in a delicate balance of vulnerability and strength. They shared laughter, stories, and moments of grief, each one a testament to their humanity amidst the chaos. One evening, as they sat around a fire after a training exercise, Sera felt compelled to share her own struggles. "I've always believed that our society's avoidance of violence is a strength. But seeing you all together, I wonder if we're missing something vital." Elias listened intently, the flickering flames casting shadows across his face. It's not about glorifying violence, it's about recognizing the lessons it teaches us. Every challenge we face shapes us, and through that, we learn empathy, resilience, and the value of life. But what if those lessons come at too great a cost? Sera countered, her heart racing at the vulnerability of her admission. Elias's gaze remained steady, unwavering. The cost is always there, but it's what we choose to do with those lessons that defines us. We can either allow our past to consume us or use it to propel us forward. His words resonated deeply within her. Sera grappled with her own history, the teachings of her people, the avoidance of conflict, and the desire for peace. Yet, in witnessing the strength of the soldiers around her, she began to question her own understanding of what it meant to truly live. As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled above, Sera felt a sense of clarity begin to form. The journey she had embarked upon was not merely about assessing humanity's potential. It was a journey toward understanding the intricate dance of life and death, love and hate, destruction and creation. Each thread woven into the fabric of existence held meaning, a story waiting to be unraveled. Yet, with every revelation came the awareness of the choice she faced. Sera knew that her decision would impact not only her own destiny, but the fate of her people and their relationship with humanity. Could she reconcile the principles of her society with the complexities she had come to admire in Elias and his comrades? As night gave way to dawn, Sera felt the weight of her journey ahead. She was no longer just an observer. She was a participant in a narrative that transcended boundaries. The heart of the soldier had become a beacon, illuminating the path toward understanding a journey that would ultimately challenge her perceptions and redefine her identity. With each step forward, she embraced the intricate dance of existence, poised at the nexus of possibility, where the lines between life and death blurred and the heart of humanity revealed its profound secrets. The story of Elias and Sera was only just beginning, a testament to the power of connection in a world fraught with contradictions. And in that connection lay the seeds of change, ready to bloom in the unlikeliest of places. The morning air hung thick with tension as Sera stood alongside the alien delegation, their collective gaze fixed on the expansive training grounds where human soldiers prepared for a military operation. The scene unfolded before them like a meticulously orchestrated performance, each movement precise, each command punctuated by the crisp sounds of discipline. The raw energy emanating from the ranks of soldiers was palpable, a living testament to the dedication and camaraderie that defined humanity in the face of adversity. Elias stood at the forefront, his presence commanding, his demeanor focused. Sera observed him closely, a figure of quiet intensity. In the moments leading up to the operation, she caught glimpses of the weight he carried not just as a soldier, but as a leader. It was a burden she had begun to understand, a reality that forced her to confront her own perceptions of power and responsibility. As the drill sergeant barked orders, the soldiers sprang into action, each movement fluid and instinctive. Sera was struck by the unyielding unity among them, a cohesion born from countless hours of training and shared experiences. The harsh realities of their environment had forged them into a collective, where the survival of the individual depended on the strength of the whole. In that moment, she felt a stirring within her an admiration for the very essence of humanity that had eluded her before. "Impressive, isn't it?" A voice broke through her reverie. It was one of the other delegates, their wide eyes reflecting a mix of awe and trepidation. "I've never seen such synchronization." "Yes," Sera replied, her voice steady. "They are prepared for the worst. But the question remains, what drives this necessity for such brutality?" The delegate's brow furrowed in contemplation, a silent acknowledgement of the paradox that lay at the heart of human existence. As the operation commenced, Sera watched with a blend of fascination and unease. The soldiers executed maneuvers that were both intricate and ruthless, their movements conveying an understanding of life and death that transcended words. The simulated combat scenario unfolded with shocking clarity. Explosions echoed across the training ground, and Sera flinched instinctively at the violence, her instinctual aversion to chaos clashing with a reality before her. Yet, she could not deny the beauty of their precision, a choreography of survival that echoed the depths of human experience. Why do they embrace this? Sera mused, her thoughts racing. Why is conflict an integral part of their identity? Elias, having overheard her, turned slightly, his expression a mixture of empathy and resolve. It's not that we embrace conflict, Sera. We've learned that sometimes it's the only language that gets results. In a universe filled with danger, preparedness is survival. Sera's heart raced at his words. This was not mere justification. It was an insight into the core of human nature. The leaders of her people had always spoken of peace as the ultimate goal, but here was a species that recognized the harsh truths of existence. Could peace truly be achieved in a world fraught with conflict, or was the essence of life itself a struggle for dominance and understanding? As the simulation continued, Sera felt the gravity of Elias's leadership settle over her like a heavy cloak. He moved among his soldiers with a calm assurance, offering guidance, support, and direction. She realized that the harsh decisions he made were not born from cruelty, but rather from an unwavering commitment to protect those under his command. A pivotal moment in the simulation drew her attention. A squad was pinned down by simulated enemy fire, and the soldiers faced a choice to retreat and preserve their lives or to press forward, risking everything to protect their comrades. The tension in the air was electric, and Sera's breath caught as she witnessed their unity in the face of potential loss. Elias stepped forward, his voice steady as he shouted instructions, guiding them through the chaos. "Stick together, move as one, we're stronger together than apart." It was a call to arms, a reminder of their shared purpose. The soldiers responded, a collective surge of determination washing over them as they executed their strategy with lethal efficiency. In that moment, Sera grasped the essence of leadership, not as a position of power, but as a profound responsibility. The burden Elias carried was not one of dominance. It was the weight of ensuring the safety of his team, the lives he was charged to protect. As the simulation concluded, the soldiers regrouped, their expressions a mixture of relief and exhilaration. Elias moved among them, offering words of encouragement, each interaction a thread woven into the fabric of trust that defined their unit. Sera marveled at the emotional intelligence required to lead in such a demanding environment, a skill that transcended mere tactics and strategy. "Do you see now?" Elias asked, his voice low, as if he had sensed her internal struggle. "Leadership isn't about making friends, it's about making decisions. Sometimes those decisions mean sacrifice, and it's not easy." Sera nodded slowly, her mind racing with the implications of his words. "But how do you reconcile the necessity of those sacrifices with the desire for peace?" Elias's gaze held hers, the depth of his understanding evident. "Peace is a goal, but it's also a process. We can't ignore the reality that sometimes, to achieve it, we must confront the darkness head-on. It's not about glorifying violence, it's about acknowledging that it exists, and in doing so, we find ways to navigate it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the training ground, Sera felt a shift within her. The complexities of human nature were beginning to unfold, revealing layers of understanding that challenged her preconceived notions. In the light of day, she had seen soldiers trained for conflict, but as night approached, she was beginning to grasp the humanity behind the uniform. The following days were marked by an intensified exploration of human culture, particularly the rituals surrounding leadership and sacrifice. Sera attended discussions led by military strategists, observing the intricate interplay between moral philosophy and tactical decision-making. Each conversation revealed a different facet of what it meant to be a leader in a Deathworld, and Sera found herself captivated by the depth of thought that underpinned their actions. One evening, as they gathered around a fire, the atmosphere shifted to one of introspection. Soldiers shared stories of loss and camaraderie, each tale weaving a tapestry of shared experiences that illuminated the essence of their existence. Sera felt drawn into their world, her own barriers dissolving as she connected with the raw emotions that permeated the air. "Tell me about your first mission," one soldier asked Elias, the curiosity evident in his tone. Elias paused, the memories flickering across his face like shadows. "It was a reconnaissance mission. We were tasked with gathering intel on an enemy encampment. We thought we were prepared, but nothing could have readied us for what we encountered. The soldiers leaned in, their expressions a blend of anticipation and reverence. "What happened?" Sera asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias inhaled deeply, the weight of his past palpable. "We lost men that day. Good men. I had to make the call to withdraw when we were outnumbered. It felt like betrayal, leaving them behind. The guilt has never left me." Sera's heart ached for him. The burden of command was evident in his eyes, a haunting reminder of the sacrifices that accompanied leadership. "But you did what you had to do. You protected the others," she murmured, her voice trembling. "It doesn't make it easier," he replied, a vulnerability breaking through his stoic exterior. "Every decision carries consequences, and sometimes the weight of those choices can be unbearable. But as leaders, we must find a way to bear that weight for the sake of our people." The fire crackled, the warmth contrasting with the chill of the evening air. Sera absorbed his words, the truth resonating within her. In a universe filled with uncertainty, the complexities of leadership mirrored the struggles of existence itself. It was a delicate balance between empathy and duty, a dance between preservation and sacrifice. As the days turned into weeks, Sera found herself increasingly drawn to Elias, not just as a soldier, but as a person, a man navigating the intricacies of his role with grace amidst chaos. Their conversations deepened, veering into the realms of philosophy and the nature of existence. Sera began to question her own beliefs, her understanding of peace evolving as she absorbed the truths woven into the fabric of human experience. One evening, as they strolled through the training grounds, Sera felt compelled to voice her thoughts. "Elias, do you believe that peace is attainable? Or is it simply a fleeting illusion in a chaotic universe?" He considered her question, his gaze contemplative. "Peace is an aspiration, but it's also a reflection of our willingness to confront our demons. We can't ignore the realities of our existence, but we can strive to create a balance. It's not easy, and it requires sacrifice." "Do you ever doubt that sacrifice is worth it?" she pressed, the vulnerability of her question hanging in the air. Elias paused, his expression thoughtful. "Every day, but in those moments of doubt, I remind myself of why we fight, for the lives we protect, for the hope of a better tomorrow. The weight of command is heavy, but it's a weight I willingly carry for the sake of those who cannot." Sera felt a profound connection to his words, a realization that transcended their differing backgrounds. The essence of leadership was not merely a title. It was a commitment to a greater purpose, a promise to uphold the values that defined their existence. In a universe often marred by conflict, the choice to fight for something greater than oneself became a source of strength. As the stars twinkled overhead, Sera understood that the journey ahead was not just about survival. It was about discovering the meaning behind every decision, every sacrifice. The weight of command, once a burden, had transformed into a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the possibility of peace remained. The question of whether peace was attainable no longer seemed to matter. What mattered was the willingness to pursue it, to bear the weight of leadership with grace, and to navigate the complexities of life with courage. In the quiet of the night, as Sera walked beside Elias, she felt the weight of her own decisions settling upon her. The path forward was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the heart of humanity, with all its contradictions and complexities, held the answers to questions she had never thought to ask. And so, with each step they took, the seeds of understanding grew, a silent testament to the power of connection and the unyielding pursuit of something greater than themselves.